Part 1. Dr. Ambedkar in the Bombay Legislature. Chapter 1 on Budget 1. Reference BLC Debates, Volume 19, page 164 to 68, dated 24th February 1927. Reference over. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Reference. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was sworn in as a nominated member of the Bombay Legislative Council on Friday, the 18th February 1927. Reference over. Mr. President, the budget discussion has gone on for a long period, and I feel that all that could have been said has already been said. It would therefore have been better for a new member like me to keep silent, but I feel that there is a point of view which has not yet been placed before this House, and as I represent that point of view, I think it is my duty to give expression to it. Mr. President, when one begins to criticize the budget, one is at the outset overcome with a feeling of helplessness. For the range of effective criticism is indeed very small. The total estimated expenditure as given in this budget is something like 36%. The total estimated revenue of this presidency is 15.5 crores, and out of this about 9.5 crores is being levied by the executive without the consent of the council. I refer to the land revenue and excise revenue. So taking both the expenditure and revenue into consideration, I think it is fair to say that the criticism which one has to make is indeed very limited, because the council can only deal with 64% of the expenditure and 40% of the revenue. But taking the things as they are, Mr. President, I proceed to offer such remarks as I am capable of making. Commencing with the revenue side of the budget, I wish to deal with it, in the first place, from the standpoint of the Honorable the Finance Member, and secondly, from the standpoint of the taxpayers. The Honorable the Finance Member will agree with me when I say that the first and most essential requirement of a good revenue system is that it should be reliable. It does not matter whether that revenue system brings in large revenue or a small revenue. But whatever it brings, it ought to be certain in its yield. Judging the revenue side from this standpoint, I find that the land revenue, which is the largest item in the budget, is capable of a variation of something like 50 lakhs. If you take excise, the second largest source of revenue, you find that since the inception of the reforms, it has shown a variation of 73 lakhs. I therefore invite the attention of my friend, the Honorable the Finance Member, to consider the consequences that would follow if these two items in the revenue system varied in the same direction. If they did, then I think they will land him into a ditch of more than 1 crore. I do not know whether such a system of revenue is a system on which the Honorable the Finance Member should rely. But it is for him to see that, and not for me, because he is in charge of the finances of this country. Now, Mr. President, taking the same items of revenue into consideration and judging them from the standpoint of the taxpayers, I think the revenue system of this presidency is inequitable and undefensible. Take first of all the land revenue. Whatever may be the quibbles, whether it is tax or whether it is rent, I may say that there is no doubt that this land revenue is a tax on the profits of the businessman. If these two levies are the same, I want to know from the Honorable the Finance Member as to why there should be difference in the methods of levying the two. Every farmer, whatever may be his income, is brought under the levy of the land tax. But under the income tax, no person is called upon to pay the tax if he has not earned any income during the year. That system does not exist as far as land revenue is concerned. Whether there is a failure of crop or abundance of crop, the poor agriculturist is called upon to pay the revenue. The income tax is levied on the recognized principle of ability to pay. But under the land revenue system, a person is taxed on the same rate, whether he is a owner of 1 acre of land or a jahagirdar or an inamdar. He has to pay the tax at the same rate. It is a proportionate tax and not a progressive tax as it ought to be. Again, under the income tax, holders of income below a certain minimum are exempted from levy. But under the land revenue, the tax is remorselessly collected from everyone, be he rich or poor. Take again the excise. This is an item from which a large revenue is derived. There can be no two opinions that this is a public legal monopoly. This was not meant for the purpose of enabling the government to raise revenue, but the monopoly was enacted because the government would be in a better position to put a stop to demoralization of the people by a spread of the habit of drink. If collection of revenue is the only aim, there is no necessity for a government monopoly. How has this monopoly been managed by government? If you take the figures as to how much the people of each presidency spend in drinking, you will find that the Bombay presidency stands first so far as the drinking habit is concerned. I find in Madras every individual spends rupees 1-3-7 within bracket rupees 1.22. In Bengal, rupees 0-7-1 within bracket rupees 0.45. In United Provinces, rupees 0-4-7 within bracket rupees 0.28. In Punjab, rupees 1-7-8 within bracket rupees 1.48. In Burma, rupees 1-4-0 within bracket rupees 1.25. Bihar and Orissa, rupees 0-8-7 within bracket rupees 0.58. In Central Provinces and Berar, rupees 0-15-0 within bracket rupees 0.94. In Assam, rupees 0-13-3 within bracket 0.83. But in Bombay, we have the appalling figure of each individual spending rupees 2-2-9 within bracket 2.18. I ask my honorable friend, the finance member, whether this is a defensible system. Mr. President, government has accepted the policy of prohibition and has adopted certain measures for carrying out that policy to fruition. But they have not done so. The first of such measures is rationing. Now, sir, the quantity of country liquor rationed out by government beyond which it was not to sell was fixed at 18,83,804 gallons, but the limit fixed was only an idle pretense at checking consumption. For the actual quantity consumed was only 14,05,437 gallons, that is, the actual quantity rationed was in excess of the actual quantity consumed by 4,78,367 gallons. I understand that a second measure adopted for carrying the policy of prohibition to fruition was the appointment of an advisory committee. But I have found that 40% of the composition of this advisory committee is composed of anti-prohibitionists. I do not think, Mr. President, that the government benches are treating this council with respect, which it is their due. Mr. President, while I am speaking about the financial system of this country, I think it is fair to suggest to my honorable friend, the finance member, that the prosperity of the people is the greatest patrimony of the state. He should not demoralize them, or he should not beggar them. A state that beggars its people ends in beggaring itself. Mr. President, I now want to touch. I know my time is very brief, and I hope you will be pleased to allow me a little more time if you can. The Honorable the President? No. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Coming to the other source of revenue, I do not think that the Honorable the Finance Member is doing his best in husbanding the resources of this presidency to the best advantage. For instance, taking the forest as a source of revenue, in 1921-22, the forest revenue was rupees 74.9 lakhs. In 1927-28, the forest revenue was only rupees 74 lakhs. There is, you will see, therefore, a stagnation of the revenue. But if you take the expenditure that has been incurred on the forest, you will see that the expenditure has increased from rupees 40 lakhs to rupees 48 lakhs, so that ultimately, when we come to speak about the net gain from forests, you find a loss of something like rupees 4 lakhs. Mr. President, I next want to speak of irrigation and civil works. I think I will be wasting my time in giving details. But I do want to say one thing. Mr. President, that when government undertakes a certain industry or work, it does it primarily for revenue, or it does it primarily for service, though incidentally for revenue, or it may be that it does it primarily for service. I do not think that the government has any defined or definite policy with regard to the services it has undertaken. For instance, I personally feel there might be difference of opinion between me and the other honorable members of this house, but I do feel that the irrigation department is not giving us the full return that we are entitled to get from them. I think if my honorable friend refers to the Taxation Inquiry Committee's report, he will find that the water rate is very low. I think we on the side of the House are entitled to expect from him better husbanding of the resources of this presidency. Mr. President, I now turn to the expenditure side of this budget. I know most members of this House are alarmed at the deficit. I may say I'm not. Deficit is not something which ought to alarm honorable members. What has disquieted me is this, that the deficit in the budget is not due to any inclusion in it of a large policy of social advancement. The deficit is due entirely to the increase in cost on the non-productive charges of the administration. Mr. President, the Honorable Member, the Secretary of the Finance Department, was yesterday very wise, I should say, in telling the House to be reasonable. He said that if the honorable members of this House desires that they should be taken seriously by the government benches, they should be reasonable. Mr. President, I admit the force of that argument, but I want to send the argument back to him and ask him whether the increase in expenditure that has taken place in this presidency is reasonable and can be justified on the ground of increase of the administrative quality. Mr. President, when you compare the cost of administration in this presidency from the year 1910 to the year 1927-28, and I am taking only figures of such departments for the purpose of comparison as were wholly provincial then and as are wholly provincial now, I find under general administration the charges in 1910-11 were only rupees 17 lakhs. Today, they are rupees 126 lakhs. I ask my honorable friend, the Finance Secretary, whether that is reasonable. Mr. G. Wills, if the honorable member will permit me, I would point out to him that I explained to the honorable member Rao Sahib Dadubhai Desai yesterday that the figures given in the statements in the budget should be used with great care. The classification of general administration before the reforms is not the classification which is taken now. There was an item of expenditure on account of alienated lands which was then shown under another head and which is now included under the head of general administration. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Be that as it may, we are bound to take the statements as are given there, of course, subject to the correction as my honorable friend has said. But I do think that the cost of general administration in this presidency has been very, very heavy. In fact, it had no justification even from past history of this presidency. We have today, for instance, 4 executive councillors and 3 ministers, and we have under them secretaries and deputy secretaries numbering about 25 or so. I do not think that my honorable friend, the Finance Secretary, will say that that is something reasonable. The Honorable the Finance Member has tried to explain away this extravagant cost of administration in this presidency. I hope, Mr. President, you will give me some little time. The Honorable the President. No, I'm so hard pressed for time. The Honorable Member will understand. He has got only 2 minutes more. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Mr. President, of course, I will drop what I had to say, and I will now come to my conclusion. In this part of my speech, Mr. President, I want to make my position quite clear. We have been hearing from honorable members that there should be severe retrenchment. I have joined, and I do join in that chorus with all earnestness, for I believe there is room for retrenchment. But, sir, I cannot disguise from myself the fact that this retrenchment will not take us very far. Taking retrenchment as its highest, I think it would quite probably give us a relief of 1 crore or 2 crores of rupees. But how far will it go? I know by that means we could perhaps balance the budget. But is that the only ambition of this House, that the budget should be balanced? I hope, and I hope I'm right in saying, that this council is really earnest in its desire for compulsory education, for medical relief, for freedom of the people from the habit of drink, and for providing all the amenities of life. Then I want to remind this House that the good things of this earth do not fall from heaven. Every progress has its bill of costs, and only those who pay for it will have that progress. Chapter 2 on Budget 2. Reference BLC Debates Volume 22, pages 167 to 70, dated 21st February 1928. Reference over. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Sir, the budget is no doubt an unsatisfactory budget in so far as it is really a deficit budget. But it was only unsatisfactory on account of the fact that it discloses a deficit. I do not think it would have been necessary for me to take any serious notice of it. The budget, however, is not merely unsatisfactory, but it is, I think, sir, a deplorable budget, and the state of affairs is indeed a very serious state of affairs. You know, sir, that we are practically coming to a close of the first decade of the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. That being so, it is certainly worth our while to take stock of the situation as from the year 1921 up to now. Now, sir, these reforms were introduced in order that the transferred subjects may receive greater consideration at the hands of the government than the subjects which are called reserve. But, sir, if you analyze the expenditure of this presidency from the year 1921 up to now, what do we find? We find that the hopes that were entertained, that under the new regime objects of expenditure which help progress will receive preference over subjects which merely help the maintenance of law and order, have failed to come true. I shall now show how it is so. I have collected some figures of expenditure incurred in various provinces on the transferred and reserved departments, and with your permission, sir, I beg to present those figures to this House, so that the House may know how deplorable the situation is. The figures I am giving show the percentage increase or decrease of expenditure in 1925-26 as compared with the year 1921-22 over the transferred and reserved departments in the various provinces. These figures are as: there are two columns, reserved departments, transferred departments. Under reserved departments, there are two columns, increase percent, decrease percent. Under transferred department, there are again two columns, increase percent, decrease percent. Madras, reserved department, increase percent 1.21. Transferred department, increase percent 14.26. Bombay, reserved department, increase percent 6.33. Transferred department, increase percent 5.82. Bengal, transferred department, increase percent 6.11. Decrease of expenditure on reserved department. United Provinces, decrease of expenditure on reserved department. Reserved department, transferred department, increase percent 12.57. Punjab, reserved department, increase percent 10.40. Transferred department, increase percent 29.41. Burma, reserved department, increase percent 34.36. Transferred department, increase percent 6.44. Reserved department, increase percent Bihar and Orissa 5.89. Transferred department, increase percent 44.66. Reserved department, increase percent Central Provinces 6.24. Transferred department, increase percent 18.15. Reserved department, increase percent Assam 8.24. Transferred department, increase percent 12.75. Sir, if we look at these figures, what do we find? I'm sorry to find, and I'm sure everyone in this House will be sorry to find, that such an important province as Bombay should occupy the very lowest place in the order of its relative expenditure on the reserved and transferred departments. Even the province of Burma, which appears to have been so badly managed, stands higher than Bombay in this respect. I therefore submit, sir, that that is a grave scandal. Surely this is not the way in which the finances of an important presidency like the Bombay presidency should be managed. I wish the Honorable the Finance Member had paid more attention to the transferred departments than he seems to have actually paid to them. From the figures, it is evident that the reserve departments are systematically overfed and the transferred departments are systematically starved. Sir, what good is an Indian finance member if he is not to respond to the wishes of his countrymen? There is a general clamour for progress on all hands. The Honourable, the finance member, knows how very insistent the clamour is. But unfortunately, he has so far done nothing to lead us to hope for anything at his hands in the future. Then, sir, not only are the finances badly managed, but I submit that the financial position of this presidency is indeed very serious. Sir, if you examine the financial position year by year from 1921-22 to the present day, you will find that every year there is a reduction of the surplus, so much so that instead of having surplus budgets, we have exhausted our surpluses and we have now reached a period where the budget discloses a series of deficits. In 1922-23, there was a surplus of rupees 64 lakhs. In 1923-24, the surplus came down to rupees 29.38 lakhs. In the year 1925-26, the year was closed with a deficit of rupees 91 lakhs, and we know what has been the state of affairs since then. You see, sir, from these figures that the financial position of this presidency is deteriorating year by year, and I submit, sir, that having regard to the commitments made by government, the position in time to come is indeed going to be very serious. Sir, you know the loan arrangements will have soon to be paid off. Some arrangement shall have to be made for the repayment of that loan. That is bound to cast a heavy burden on the already exhausted finances of the presidency. Sir, this council and the government have been committed to universal compulsory primary education. The council and government are also committed to the carrying out of the policy of prohibition. These three items, I do not think any honourable member of government is going to deny, are going to make a very heavy call upon the finances of this presidency. And when our finances are deteriorating year by year, even without these three items, I cannot quite imagine what will be the state of affairs when we begin to give these items a practical shape. Finding myself in this situation, what surprises me most is that all this does not seem to trouble the Honourable the Finance Member at all. He does not disclose that he is aware of all these commitments. In the financial statement he has submitted, he does not show that he is conscious of these obligations. He is merely, if I may say so, carrying through a hand-to-mouth policy, a policy for the day without any thought for the morrow. There is no outline of a general policy which will improve the future exigencies of the situation. After me, the deluge seems to be watchword. He is merely trying to meet the deficit of the budget. He is calculating upon what he might be able to gain out of the reduction in the famine insurance grant and in the Meston contribution. But I ask him in all seriousness whether these small, paltry gains, as I call them, are going to really take us a long way in the financial stabilization of the presidency. I think, sir, it would be a mistake to suppose that they can. Either the Honourable the Finance Member must assure us that there are sufficient possibilities of economy in the administration of this presidency which will carry us through, or he should tell us definitely that we shall not get what we want unless we have recourse to taxation. I respectfully refer to speech made yesterday by His Excellency the Governor. In that speech, His Excellency pointed out that the Legislative Council was entirely responsible for taxation, that it was within its powers to impose such taxation as was necessary. I admit that the Legislative Council has the power of taxation. But I also submit that the initiation in the matter must come from government. It is the government that must suggest what taxation it wants. Has the government done so? The government, on the contrary, is absolutely sitting silent. It does not propose to tell us what it is going to do. It cannot be said that government has not got the data to work out a plan. We all know that the Taxation Inquiry Committee has submitted a most exhaustive report with endless recommendations which ought to suffice for the initiation of a new and adequate financial policy. These, I'm sure, are lying on the table of the Honorable the Finance Member, but nothing seems to have been done in the matter at all. I say, sir, that the situation is indeed very serious, and it is high time the Honorable the Finance Member make up his mind to deal with it in a statesmanlike manner. Chapter 2 completed.